Welcome to the Content 10X Podcast, the show where content creators learn how to harness the power of content repurposing. And now, your host, Amy Woods.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Content 10X Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and this week I'm talking about working out whether people actually consume your content and, very importantly, whether they really care. So in episode 87, I talked all about metrics and 5 ways to measure the effectiveness of your content and your repurposing efforts. And I mentioned in that episode about the metrics that help you to realize how and if people really consume the content, if they really care. So I'm digging deep into that this week. And this is so important because you need to ensure that metrics are not just a vanity measure. So in episode 87, I did emphasize that not everything can be determined through metrics, and there can often be a story behind the numbers, and there are some parameters that can't be measured by numbers but are still very, very important. But when we do have numbers to hand, let's make sure that we don't treat them as a vanity measure, because we don't want to create content that does nothing for our business or for our ultimate goals. So ultimately, when we're creating content, if it's in the form of content marketing for a business, then of course we want that to lead to people interested in us, they connect with us, they care, and they ultimately go on to want to work with us. That's usually the ultimate goal of content marketing. So with that in mind, really, who cares if you've got 1 million downloads or 1 million views or something like that, if the people who are in those statistics are not those people and they don't care? So what if no one really listened, watched or read for more than a couple of seconds? Would you really want to attribute much to those people who left after a couple of seconds? If that was the case, then actually that maybe indicates that there's actually a problem versus something to celebrate. What was it about your content that made them not want anymore? Why did they run away? Does your content repel people? You know, that's an important thing to look at, rather than rejoicing in, let's say, 1 million downloads if actually only 1,000 people within that million listened to the whole episode or watched the whole video or whatever it may be. Okay, so basically what I want to do is break that down into some different content types and just give you some ideas on how you can try and determine a little bit more about your audience and about the available statistics. So for podcasters, for those of you who are podcasters, did you know that downloads is not the only metric that you should look at? Because it's one thing, as I said, for people to download your podcast, but did they actually listen to it? Because if you are a subscriber to a podcast and you get an auto download onto your mobile device, and then you don't actually do anything with that, it downloads and you never listen to it, then you as the host, do you want to be counting that as contributing to your downloads because the person who had the download did nothing with it? And then, of course, if they did listen to it, then how much of it did they listen to? Did they really care? It's a bit like social media. It's good to have lots of followers, but do they actually care what you post? Do they engage with you? So Apple Podcasts present a metric called average consumption in their analytics. If you go to Apple Podcasts Connect and log in with your Apple ID for your podcast, this metric will enable podcasters to measure how much time and attention listeners are giving to their podcasts. So how much percentage of the show did they listen to? Did they listen to 1%, 50%, 100%? That would be great of the show. So this average consumption statistic is far more important, really, than downloads. Now, Spotify calls this metric episode performance, and Stitcher, I think it's called average completion rate. But these average consumption percentages are great because they just go beyond the download and help you work out whether people consider your content to be quality. Now, I personally don't have thousands and thousands of people who listen to the show, but I've always been proud of this average consumption rate because I can see that people who do listen pretty much listen to the whole episode, and that makes me really pleased. Now, in Apple Podcast Connect, you can also click on an episode and you can look at the listen duration as well. So you can see how long per device people are listening to your episodes. Another great way of finding out if people really care. And then another tip is if you want to work out how many really true loyal subscribers you have, then when you're looking at downloads, look at the downloads within a couple of weeks of your podcast going live. So look at how many people downloaded it within 30 days. So again, this is downloads. So there are some of the flaws, as I mentioned, with downloads. It may be an auto download to an app, but at least those that are in a very short amount of time from your podcast being released, it's more likely to indicate that they're the people who are going and wanting to listen and actively going to your podcast because they really care. Okay, so that's for podcasters. Then video. So very similar, really. If you create content, video content, then you might not want to just look at, for example, your number of YouTube subscribers, because that is fantastic. If you've got lots of YouTube subscribers, then you've obviously been putting out some great video content out there. But how many people are viewing your video? And then going further, how many people are watching all of your videos as well? So what is the audience retention statistic rates looking like on your videos? How much do people watch? At what point do they start to drop off? Now, all of this data is so important, because we're not just putting videos out there for people to watch the first 20 seconds, or, if it's a 10-minute video that by 2 or 3 minutes, everyone's gone. That's a really big waste of time for you if the last half of all of your videos nobody watches. So you need to be looking at those kind of statistics, the retention statistics, and working out, do people care, or is it kind of putting people off after a couple of minutes? And then you can work around an experiment, and you can try and work out how you can get the video views up and how you can get people to watch the whole content. Now, on social media, I mentioned this earlier, but that's not about having thousands and millions of followers either, especially if many of them don't engage with you. Many could actually be fake accounts, bots, that kind of thing. It's about having an audience of people who care about what you say. So a small, highly engaged audience is far better than a large disengaged audience. So make sure that you bear that in mind when working out what metrics matter to you the most. Email stats as well. So it doesn't really matter if you have thousands and tens of thousands, millions of subscribers if none of them open your email. So look at your email open rates. That's far more important than how many subscribers you have. Look at the percentage of people who are opening your emails. How many people actually care? Do they take action? Do they click on action within your email so they read and actually do what you want them to do? Now, all of those kind of statistics show that people are interested and care. And with email, often it's a good idea to do a cleanup and remove people who do not open any of your emails, so that you just have an actively engaged email list of people who want to receive your emails and care about what you have to say. So overall, the point here of today's episode is that when you're deciding if your content works, and when deciding on the popularity of your content, especially if you're trying to decide which content should you repurpose because it's really popular, don't get too bogged down in looking at some of what may be classed as more vanity type metrics like podcast downloads if you don't actually know if people have listened and cared to your podcast, video views if you don't know if people watch beyond 10 seconds. All of those kind of statistics are not quite as good as the ones that show if people actually did consume your content. So whatever content you create, try and work out how you can measure whether people actually consume and whether they care. And that can tell you your top performing content, the topics that people are interested in, the content that would be great for repurposing, and so on. So thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast episode. I really do appreciate it. If you are not subscribed already, then please do go ahead and subscribe. If you could leave a review as well, I would really appreciate it. Now, if you want any help with your content repurposing, then don't hesitate to head on over to content10x.com, where you can find out all about our end-to-end content repurposing service. Also, do follow me on social media at Content10x on all of the social media platforms, where I continue to share lots of tips and advice on content repurposing, and also sometimes try and be funny as well, to mixed levels of success. So again, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.